economy, and which one will keep your family safe? Good evening from the nation's capital. I'm your host, Leland Bitter from News Nation. It's debate night, and we are focused on two men with very different views on border security, women's rights, and the future of an economy so many of us are struggling with. Moderating tonight's debate, Deanna Albritton, anchor at WRIC in Richmond, and Tom Shad, anchor at Wavy TV and Fox 43 in Norfolk. You're able to watch the debate across the country on News Nation, as well as on every television market in every county in Virginia, from Roanoke to Norfolk. Before we get to the questions, here are the rules. Senator Kaine, Mr. Cow, you will have 60 seconds to answer a question. If there is a follow-up question or rebuttal, you'll have 30 seconds to respond. When time is up, you will hear this bell. Each candidate will also have 30 seconds for a closing statement. Now, live from Norfolk State University, it's debate night in Virginia.
Welcome to NSU and welcome to our live audience that you can see that we have here. They've shown us that they are passionate, they are eager for tonight, but we have asked them to hold all reaction and response to the candidates until the very end. Good evening, candidates. I'm Deanna Albritton.
And I'm Tom Shad. We are looking forward to a very informative hour, a discussion of Virginia's most important issues, and a very spirited debate from both candidates. Deanna?
Yes, let's go ahead and get started with some big news here in Hampton Roads involving one of the busiest ports on the East Coast. The workers here are among the 45,000 in America now on strike, which could cripple our economy heading into the election and the holiday season. Mr. Cow, you have won the coin toss, so we will start with you. If you were in the negotiating room, what would a good deal look like to you? You have 60 seconds.
Well, again, thank you, NSU, for having us here. You know, the economy is hitting us all the same way. That's exactly why the ILA is doing the boycott right now and going on strike, is because ask yourself this question: are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? If you're a military person, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? If you're law enforcement, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? If your family is struggling to put food on the table, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? The answer across the board is no. The only people better off today than they were 4 years ago are illegal aliens, criminals, and senators like Senator Tim Kaine. We spend $1 billion a day to house and feed illegal aliens. I want to make sure students like NSU, when they're graduating, they know that they have a future to walk into. They get to grab onto the American dream the way I did. And that's what I'm going to fight for, is all Americans that came here legally and all Americans that grew up here.
Thank you, Mr. Cow, for explaining that. We will get to immigration later, but we did ask, if you were in the negotiation room over the port strike, what would a good deal look like to you? You have 30 seconds.
Again, they're hurting because of the inflation, the immense inflation that's going on right now. And look, just like with the hurricane that's going on right now that happened through the East Coast, you know, where's the leadership? Joe Biden's on the beach. Kamala Harris is with a bunch of billionaires doing a fundraiser, and Senator Tim Kaine is at a pig roast. And where's the leadership? If it has to do with Ukraine, they're all over it. If it's about illegal aliens, they're all over it. But if you're Americans, you're on your own.
Thank you, Mr. Cow. Mr. Kaine, the same question to you. What does a good deal look like to you in this port strike? You have 60 seconds.
Absolutely. Let me begin by thanking Norfolk State, Dr. Adams-Gaston, and the Spartans for welcoming me back to this stage. It's great to be back at Norfolk State. I want to thank Wavy and other stations for broadcasting this debate. And then two messages. One, a message of friendship to Virginia's Jewish community beginning Rosh Hashanah observations this evening. And second, a message of solidarity for those in Southwest Virginia who've been hit hard by Hurricane Helene. I was there Monday and yesterday. I'm going to be back on Friday and Saturday fighting with Governor Youngkin and our bipartisan delegation to get a disaster declaration. We'll be with you during your recovery. My opponent didn't answer the question. If you're in the room, what you're doing is you're trying to get the sides to come closer. I was on the phone earlier today with Acting Secretary of Labor, Julie Sue. That's what they're doing. We are narrowing the differences, and I think we're going to find a deal. These longshoremen haven't had a new contract in 6 years, and they're entitled 6 years later to get better treatment. And that's what I would be urging if I was in the room.
Mr. Kaine, to follow up, what does better treatment look like to you exactly? You have 30 seconds.
I'm not with the ILA to know exactly what they're asking for, but look, 6 years ago, the world was a lot different. My colleague said, nobody's better off than 4 years ago. 4 years ago, we were in the middle of COVID. Hundreds of thousands of people were dying. Businesses were closing. You couldn't find toilet paper on shelves. And we had a president trying to overturn the peaceful transfer of power. A lot has happened in the last 6 years since the ILA had their last contract. You've got to bring the terms, wages, and benefits up to where they should be circa 2024. Paying them like it's 2018 doesn't cut it.
Thank you, Mr. Kaine. And now to Tom, we will turn to the evolving crisis in the Middle East.
Thank you, Deanna. Mr. Kaine, a number of Virginia-based warships have been deployed to the area over the past several months. So far, our posture has been to defend Israel. Mr. Kaine, is there a point when U.S. military shifts to an offensive measure against Iran? You have 60 seconds.
First, I do not believe it would be a good idea for the U.S. to be in another war in the Middle East. If we've learned one thing from 2001 to 2021, we should be supporting our allies, but we should resist any effort by anyone to get the U.S. in another war in the Middle East. With respect to supporting Israel's defense, I have been rock solid pro-Israel defense since I came into the Senate in 2013, supporting the annual appropriations where Israel gets more aid than any other nation, supporting the renegotiation of the 10-year memorandum of defense with Israel in the late 2010s, and rounding up support for a supplemental package to do $14 billion for Israel as they're under attack by Hamas and others. When I was rounding up support for that bill, my opponent was asking for a pause on all military aid to Israel in December of 2023. I hope what he has seen in subsequent months has led him to change his mind. We need to support our allies, and that's what I've done, and that's what I'm going to continue to do.
And Mr. Kaine, a follow-up now. Is there a situation where you would support putting U.S. troops on the ground in the Middle East? You have 30 seconds.
You can't write off what would happen if Iran or others would foolishly wage major attacks against U.S. troops. What might you do in that circumstance? That was happening after President Trump tore up the Iran diplomacy deal. Iranian militias started to strike U.S. troops at positions in Iraq and Syria. Any attack on U.S. personnel, you would need to consider a significant response to punish those who did it. But other than that, the U.S. should not let anyone drag us into a war in the Middle East.
Thank you, Mr. Kaine. Mr. Cowell, knowing that our posture has been to defend Israel, is there a point when the U.S. military shifts to an offensive policy against Iran? You have 60 seconds.
I want to ask everybody if you knew what happened on October 7th, 2001. That's the day we invaded Afghanistan because they took down the Twin Towers. Nobody at that time could have told us, hey, take it easy on the Taliban. When they come in the middle of the night and they kill 1,200 people and they rape women and young girls and they throw babies in ovens, there should be no mercy. And when you're talking about either Hamas, Hezbollah, or the Houthis, they're all Iranian proxies. And why is Iran so emboldened now? Because they lifted up all the sanctions and they gave them all the money. So they have all the money in the world right now to wage war against us. Look, as a warrior, I'm the last person that wants to get back into war. I've been in war for 20 years. I fought in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Somalia. The difference is that we have to stand by Israel. And he has basically held off on some of the weapons that are going to Israel, saying, no offensive weapons. We can't tell them how to do things. I saw that in Vietnam when they said, hey, let's not, it's like giving guns without ammunition. That's exactly what we're doing over there. And that's the difference. I will stand by our allies all the time.
But Mr. Cowell, would you support any point where putting U.S. troops on the ground in the Middle East is an option? 30 seconds.
What do you mean in the Middle East? If you're talking about Israel, Israel is so proud. They will never ask for American troops on the ground. They've never asked it. They've always fought their own battles, and they just want support from us. But when our friends are, when their friends or they think are their friends are giving them weapons and say, hey, you can't use it for this, you can't use it for that, that's what happens. Is you have weakness in the White House right now, and you have weakness in the Senate, and that's why they're doing what they're doing.
Thank you, Mr. Cowell. Now we're going to shift to cost of living. The economy is the top issue for Virginia voters, and we recently spoke with a woman shopping at the grocery store. Here's what she said.
I have to budget certain things that I'm not used to budgeting in order to get basic necessities like milk, bread, cheese, etc.
Mr. Cowell, Virginians on average are spending $1,100 more per month on the same everyday items they did in January of 2021. The Bureau of Labor Statistics says that amount is slightly higher than the national average. Mr. Cowell, please give us one specific policy you would prioritize to bring down costs. You have 60 seconds.
Right now, we need to be energy independent. That is the crux of everything. If it costs more for a farmer to farm their land, it's going to cost also more for a trucker to bring it there. And what they've done is they've made us dependent on oil from countries that hate us, like Iran and Venezuela. These countries hate us in the Middle East, and we need to be energy independent in this country. And that means unleashing all the energy we can get in order to bring forth, American power. I heard him say at a forum a couple weeks ago that, solar and wind are more efficient than nuclear power. Like, can you imagine one of our aircraft carriers out there on wind power? I mean, what do you want? Put sails on there? Look, I'm a warrior by trade, but also I'm an engineer and a physicist. I'm telling you right now, that's wrong. Nuclear power is the most clean and efficient form of energy out there, and we need to explore more of that in Virginia, and we need to be energy independent and stop being dependent on other countries.
So to clarify, that would be your one policy, energy independence?
Yes.
All right, thank you, Mr. Cowell. Another follow-up now, Mr. Cowell. If elected, former President Donald Trump has promised to tax all imported items. Would you support that policy? You have 30 seconds.
Why are our industries being pushed out? Basically, we put so many regulations on industry that we're forced to send it outwards. We have the cleanest practice in America, including oil production, right? But then we push it out to other countries, and we add on this Inflation Reduction Act, and it's really clean, green energy. And what we need to do is not tax our industry here. What we need to do is tax other countries bringing it in goods, because our people are getting taxed here and when they bring it abroad as well.
Thank you, Mr. Cowell. Mr. Kaine, Mr. Cowell just criticized the economy earlier, did talk about energy independence as well. Earlier, we heard from the Virginia shopper who said that her grocery budget is strained. Please give us at least one policy that you support to help struggling Americans. You have 60 seconds.
First, Virginians do not like being misled. And when my opponent says we need to be energy independent, he forgot to mention that under the Biden administration, America is producing more domestic energy than at any time in the nation's history. And the good news is the production is, yes, nuclear, which I support, natural gas, which I support, but also wind and solar. And that is making a huge difference in the economy right here in Hampton Roads with the Chesapeake announcement of Greenlink building a manufacturing facility here. We are the energy leaders in the world because of these policies. What would I do on inflation? First, COVID-19 was a sledgehammer to the global economy, disrupting all supply chains, and every nation had inflation problems. Our economy has rebounded faster than virtually any, and inflation is coming down. The Fed just dropped interest rates and is signifying that they're going to do it again. What would I do? Let's continue to invest in clean energy that's affordable. Let's continue to bring down costs on prescription drugs for seniors, and let's continue to provide American adults with relief from student loan debts. That's three things I have done. I'll do more. My opponent has opposed all three of those things.
Mr. Kaine, thank you. Deanna.
Thanks, Tom. Mr. Kaine, Vice President Kamala Harris promised to enact the first ever federal ban on so-called price gouging if elected. Does price gouging exist on groceries and other necessities? You have 30 seconds.
Deanna, I'm glad you asked that because Governor Youngkin just the other day warned against price gouging in Virginia in the aftermath of Hurricane Helene. Attorney General Myers has warned and said we have tools at our disposal in the state to go against those who would price gouge, especially during a challenging time. So yes, whether it's through the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, by regulation, or whether it's by legislation that Congress should pass, we should look at instances of price gouging. The other thing we should do is not embrace Trump tariffs. The Trump tariffs would be a massive tax that would cause prices on all these items that are imported to go up. On that, I differ strongly from my opponent, who seems to think the Trump tariff plan makes great sense.
Mr. Kaine, you just said that you wanted to look into instances of price gouging. Are you able to name a company in Virginia that is price gouging currently? You have 15 seconds.
I cannot name one right now, but I was just in Appalachia, and I was with the law enforcement officials in Pulaski County visiting damage there. And they're talking about the fact that they already see people coming in and trying to take advantage of those who have been suffering when it comes to building materials and other things that they need to get their lives back on track. That's why Governor Youngkin, Attorney General Miyares, and Vice President Harris have all said price gouging is real, and we need the tools to deal with it.
All right, thank you, Mr. Kaine. We have to move on to housing affordability.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Cal. Moving now to housing costs, as I mentioned, recent census data shows nearly 1 in 5 homeowners and half of renters in Virginia spent more than the recommended 30% of their incomes on housing. Mr. Kaine, in a state like Virginia, where a typical home costs $440,000, do you believe additional federal support is needed to help current renters achieve home ownership? You have 60 seconds.
Deanna, great question. Let me tackle it a couple of different ways. I want to bring down the cost of rent, and I also want to bring down the cost of purchasing a home. Here's how you do both. On the rental side, there is a very strong federal program called the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit. There is a bill currently pending in the Senate that was passed in the House with a bipartisan vote to expand the low-income housing tax credit. I strongly support that, and I'm a co-sponsor of that effort on the Senate side. Sometimes the right thing to do is create a new program, but when you have one that works, just do more of it. On home ownership, I support what the Vice President has indicated about federal assistance for down payments for those who are buying their first homes. The Fed dropping the interest rate is also going to free up some financing for first-time home buyers. A lot of people in their first homes now, they don't want to move to a second home because they're not going to be able to get as good an interest rate on their mortgage. With interest rates coming down, they can move, and that will open up a lot of starter homes for families that are looking to buy the first home. So those would be the 3 things I would do.
Thank you, Mr. Kaine. Some of those things you named might take a bit of time to shake out, and historically several Virginia cities have ranked in the top 10 for evictions in America. So how would you help keep renters in their homes now? You have 30 seconds.
Again, I think the low-income housing tax credit is the best program we have, but it is the case. Virginia has some tough landlord-tenant laws that in the past have led to high eviction rates in Virginia. We've got members of the General Assembly here, and I'm very proud of efforts that they have made in the last few years to change the landlord-tenant laws to reduce eviction rates. I think those efforts at the state level are showing success. There's other things we can do. I have a bill that would guarantee to any veteran that they could get a housing voucher so we would have no veterans homelessness in the country. So there are things at the state level that need to be done, but there's also smart federal strategies that work that I support.
Thank you, Mr. Kaine. Mr. Cowell, on the same subject, America is currently short 5.5 million homes. What policy would you support to increase the housing supply? You have 60 seconds.
Again, one of the things we have is the problem we have right now is that we're paying $1 billion a day to feed and house illegal aliens in this country. We're taking care of them better than we've taken care of Americans. We need to be medevacing a lot of these Americans that they're homeless right now due to the Hurricane Helene, and we need to put them into the hotels and getting room service instead of giving it to illegal aliens. And my fear with what Kamala Harris wants to do with unrealized gains is if my house goes up in Zillow, it's just go up in Zillow, but then I don't have that money in my pocket, and she wants to tax that. And that's exactly what's going on right now is, one of the great things about being American is the freedom, and the second thing is ownership. Okay, a lot of countries don't allow you to own the lands, and what they're doing right now is they want to push you out of ownership of your home, and so only corporations and very rich people can buy it, and that's what I want to fight against.
Well, Mr. Cowell, thank you so much for responding, but I'm looking to see what policy you would support that would increase the housing supply. You have 30 seconds.
Again, in Northern Virginia, where I live, there's a lot of, the cost of living is very, very high. But if we can build affordable housing further south and have more VREs and mass transit to bring people up there to work at these, in the Northern Virginia area, then that's how we're going to solve the problem.
Thank you, Mr. Cow. Moving on now to immigration. Tom will have the next set of questions.
Thank you, Deanna. Mr. Cowell, you supported removing undocumented immigrants who have committed violent crime. Do you support mass deportation of all undocumented immigrants? You have 60 seconds.
Immigration is very near and dear to my heart. When Vietnam fell, we had nowhere to go, and America had brought us in. And my parents waited in line for 7 years. We all did, for 7 years to get our citizenship. The last thing that my dad had hang over his bed when he passed away 2 years ago was his naturalization certificate. I love this country so much that I wrote a blank check up to and including my life to defend it for 25 years in Iraq, Afghanistan, Somalia, and other parts of the world. So here's my thing to anybody who wants to come here. Don't ask for the American dream if you're not willing to obey American laws and embrace the American culture, because I did. And so that's the number one criteria coming in this country. If you come here illegally, then you need to leave, especially if you're a violent crime person. We just found out last week there are 13,000 convicted murderers and 16,000 convicted rapists that came across under their watch. That's unacceptable. We need to protect Americans every single day, and that's what I did.
Thank you, Mr. Cowell. But the question, do you support mass deportation of all documented immigrants? That was the question asked. You have 30 seconds to respond.
If you came here illegally, you're basically screwing up the whole system. There's people that are waiting in line, like my family, for 7 years for their naturalization papers. And so you can't jump the line. I mean, you go to Costco and you jump the line, what do you think is going to happen? You know? And so that's the thing. You can't come here and expect the American dream if you're not willing to obey the American laws and embrace the American culture. That's what I did.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Cowell. The policy of mass deportations, though, that you support, if they result in additional violence and unrest, how should the government respond? You have 30 seconds.
There's violence and unrest now. Look at Aurora, Colorado. Look at all the other places in the world where MS-13 gangs are coming across. Fentanyl. It's already happening. It's already happening in our country. Deport anybody that's committing crimes right now. That's the first thing. We need to secure the border. We need to deport anybody that's already over here or committing crimes, and stop giving $1 billion a day, and that includes gift cards that they're giving them, and plane tickets anywhere, and a cell phone, and then enforce the E-Verify. If they don't get paid to do their jobs, then they will self-deport.
Thank you, Mr. Cowell. Mr. Kaine, since President Joe Biden took office, at least 10 million undocumented migrants have crossed the border. Would you support granting amnesty to those already in the country today? You have 60 seconds.
My opponent wouldn't answer your question on tariffs, and he wouldn't answer your question on the longshoremen, but he did answer your question on mass deportation. He's in favor of the mass deportation of more than 10 million people, which would devastate the economy. I have supported strong immigration policy since I came to the Senate in 2013. One of the first bills we had was a bill, comprehensive immigration reform, that included $45 billion of border security investment. The Republican House killed the bill after it was passed in the Senate by a bipartisan supermajority. In 2018, I cobbled together a bill, $25 billion in border security in exchange for protection for dreamers. President Trump said that he would support it, but when the Senate introduced the bill in a bipartisan fashion, he told those to kill it. We recently negotiated a very tough border deal that would have put a lot of resources on the border to stop illegal immigration. President Trump asked for Republicans to oppose it, even though it was supported by the Border Control Union. And when asked why he was opposing it, President Trump says, "We don't want to fix this problem. We want to complain about the problem." As soon as we get Republicans that are willing to work for common sense immigration reform, we can keep folks from coming here illegally, and we can also have the workforce that America needs, because we won't have it without immigration reform.
Thank you, Mr. Kaine. But the question was, do you support granting amnesty to those already here?
I've never supported amnesty.
Thank you, Mr. Kaine. Mr. Kaine, one more question. What you have proposed would require significant funding. You talked about the Dreamers. You talked about other programs. How do you propose paying for this? You have 30 seconds.
Tom, I'm glad you asked me that question, because the Congressional Budget Office and others indicate that one of the few things that Congress can do that will increase the GDP of this nation without really costing much money is immigration reform. Why? Because if we do an immigration reform that allows people to come here and work, they will pay taxes, they'll contribute to the Social Security Trust Fund, their productivity. Families like my opponents and families like mine who came here from Ireland in the 1850s, they will help grow the economy. Immigration reform might be the one best thing that could be done by Congress to expand the American economy. We need to protect the border, and we need to have the workforce that America needs going into the future.
Thank you, Mr. Kaine. Now on the topic of reparations, I'm going to start with Mr. Kaine. 405 years ago, the White Lion slave ship docked with dozens of enslaved people just miles from where we sit here at Norfolk State, now starting the slave industry in what is now the United States. Vice President and Democratic presidential nominee Kamala Harris did support some form of reparations in 2019 as a senator. Mr. Kaine, would you support some form of it for today's descendants of the enslaved? You have 45 seconds.
Senator Cory Booker has a bill that would look at this question of whether those who descended from those who were brought here as slaves should be entitled to some form of assistance because of the generations of denying their families the ability to accumulate wealth. I think the best thing we can do to try to eliminate persistent inequalities is focus on education. I have been a proud backer of funding for HBCUs like Norfolk State, helping this university get funding for STEM careers for students, helping HBCUs be able to start medical schools to expand the medical profession, helping HBCUs train the next generation of classroom teachers. So I actually think the best strategy to deal with persistent inequities is educational support, and have always supported those efforts and will continue to.
Mr. Kaine, thank you. Mr. Cowell, same question to you. Would you support some form of reparations for today's descendants of the enslaved? You have 45 seconds.
Our country needs to heal, and we can't keep healing if we keep picking at the scabs. When I came to this country, my mom said, they can take away your money, they can take away your position in life, but they can never take away knowledge in your head. That's why we push education so hard. And education is the only equalizer out here. And that's why I want to make sure that all Americans have that ability to go to school. I mean, there's a lot of issues right now with schools. I mean, the tuition keeps going up. Look at NSU. Since he came in office, the tuition at NSU has tripled. What I want to do is bring it down to 0% interest and just allow for students to go to school and get an education to get themselves out. There's other larger schools, not NSU, but larger schools that have huge endowments. They should be the ones that co-sign for these loans. But again, it shouldn't be the American people, and I want to make sure this country moves forward and heals.
My opponent also forgot to mention that he wants to abolish the Department of Education. That is on his website. That's a plan he supports. That would hurt students in Norfolk State and all over this country.
We will get to education a little bit later on, but thank you, Mr. Cowell.
We do have so much more to discuss with the candidates. So for those of you watching at home or here with us live, stick around. We'll be back after this quick break.
And welcome back to our debate. I'm Tom Shad.
I'm Deanna Albritton from WRIC in Richmond, Virginia.
We wanted to clarify one thing. Mr. Kaine did speak about education in that last segment. We made a mistake by not giving Mr. Cowell a chance to respond to what Mr. Kaine had said. Mr. Cowell, please.
Again, with Department of Education, that's what belongs to the states, okay? Not to the federal government. The federal government, like, they screw up everything they touch. Let's be honest with you. The federal government, I mean, a lot of the Board of Education, or I'm sorry, the Secretary of Education, the Department of Education, they only pay for things like the teachers' unions. They're not really pushing out what they need to be pushing for the states. Each state knows what they need to take care of for their own personal states.
Leaving education of the state was what led to school segregation. The Supreme Court in Brown versus Board of Education had to say that from a federal law perspective, states could not discriminate against students. You can't leave education just to the states, because if you do, we've seen it and we don't want to go back.
Mr. Kaine, thank you. We will get to education later. Now we'll go to military recruiting with Gianna.
Thank you, Tom. Mr. Cowell, we're going to start with you on this one. The Department of Defense says during the last fiscal year, the military services collectively missed recruiting goals by about 41,000 recruits. Mr. Cowell, you have stated, quote, this administration has a growing obsession with DEI. It's no wonder we have a military recruiting problem. Can you please explain how you believe diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts have impacted military recruiting efforts? You have 30 seconds.
9/11 changed my life like it did a lot of military people. You know, I deployed to invade Iraq when my wife was 8 months pregnant with our first child. I didn't know if I'd ever meet him. And we did that because we love this country so much. And watching Afghanistan fall broke my heart. They turned their backs on our military people. They turned their backs on all of our allies out there. And what they did in COVID-19 was irrepressible. I mean, what they did is they kicked out tens of thousands of military people that refused to take a COVID vaccine. So if you're a military person or a young person wanting to go in the military, would you trust a military or a government that would turn your back on them just for an experimental vaccine?
Thank you, Mr. Cowell. But could you please explain how you believe diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts specifically are hampering military recruiting? You have 15 seconds.
Again, when you're using a drag queen to recruit for the Navy, that's not the people we want. What we need is alpha males and alpha females who are going to rip out their own guts, eat them, and ask for seconds. Those are young men and women that are going to win wars.
Please, audience, please quiet down. Audience, please. Remember, we did ask for no reaction to the candidates so that we can get through as many topics tonight as possible. Thank you, Mr. Cowell. Mr. Kaine, your opponent is saying DEI is to blame for low recruitment. Why do you think the military doesn't have enough recruits? You have 30 seconds.
Well, I didn't understand my opponent's argument. I mean, he went all around the block, and I'm not really sure what his point was about DEI. I respect his military service. I'm the father of a United States Marine Infantry Commander veteran. I respect all who serve. I serve on the Armed Services Committee, chairman of the Sea Power Subcommittee. I think what we're finding is it's hard to get people to serve. In the all-volunteer military, only 1% serve. Many people don't even know anyone in the military. We have to reach out to new constituencies and new groups. We also have to convince people the benefits of military service are enormous. People feel like if they serve in the military, they'll fall behind. No, you'll zoom ahead because of benefits like the GI Bill and others. And finally, we need to work on innovative programs such as the Army is working on right now to help young people kind of pre-qualify to pass the physical exams and then have a long and productive career serving our country.
So, Mr. Kaine, just to clarify, you are saying that you believe not enough Americans understand the benefits of the military, and that is what is hampering recruitment.
DEI is a red herring. We do surveys of families to see about people's willingness to serve. And it turns out they're not serving because they're afraid, and they're not serving because they're not patriotic. They're not serving because they don't believe military service will advance the rest of their life. They feel like they'll get off track and their colleagues will zoom ahead of them. So we need to do a better job of talking about GI Bill and other benefits, as well as the tremendous leadership training that you get in the military. My son received superb leadership training that is going to benefit him for the rest of his life. But if you don't know someone in the military, you might not understand that. And that's what we need to do to communicate better. And when we do, we'll have more people signing up to serve their country.
Thank you, Mr. Kaine. Please hold your applause, everyone. Please hold your applause. Mr. Kaine, looking at Guns in America, in the past, you have supported buyback programs for firearm accessories, but are there any circumstances under which you would support mandatory buybacks for firearms specifically? You have 45 seconds.
I have not supported mandatory buybacks, and I can't see a circumstance where I would. If we can offer incentives, that's a good thing, not a mandate. The Second Amendment gives people right to have arms. But the Second Amendment also, and the Supreme Court has said, reasonable limitations are accepted. And that's why I have supported reasonable limitations, such as one handgun a month, or a ban on high-capacity magazines, or comprehensive background checks. The worst day of my life was the day when I was governor and there was the tragic shooting at Virginia Tech. 32 people, innocent people, faculty members killed. And they were killed because we didn't have a comprehensive background check system that would have stopped that mentally disturbed young man from buying a weapon that he was not authorized to have. That is the most important thing we can do to bring down gun violence in the country. There's been good work done at the state level. We need to do comprehensive background checks at the federal level, and if we do, we will see gun violence reduce.
Thank you, Mr. Kaine. Mr. Cal, continuing to look at gun laws, your opponent, Mr. Kaine, co-authored a federal bill that could charge parents or guardians with a violent felony when their children use their guns to commit crimes, especially those that harm others. Here's our question to you. Do you support sending parents to prison when a child uses their parent's gun to commit a crime? You have 45 seconds.
I do. But here's the issue we have in this country right now. You can't legislate morality. And no new law is going to stop a person hell-bent on trying to assassinate a former president or shooting up the school. What we need more is SROs in all the public schools in Virginia, as well as mental health and crisis counselors. Not in just the schools, but also the police departments and sheriff's offices. What Senator Kaine wants to do is introduce more laws that will restrict Americans from buying guns. Instead of doing background checks on illegal aliens that are coming across this country, 13,000 convicted murders, 16,000 convicted rapists that have come across under his watch. Let's do background checks on them.
Just to clarify, just in case folks didn't hear you, you did say yes, you do support that. Okay, just wanted to make sure. And now we're going to move on to education costs. Tom.
Okay, thank you. Senator Kaine, you have supported the Biden administration's attempts at student loan forgiveness. So why do you believe that people who made the choice to take out student loans should receive taxpayer support to relieve their debt? You have 60 seconds.
So first, let's talk about public service loan forgiveness. There have been public service loan forgiveness programs in place since the first Bush administration, but they weren't being used. And in fact, the past administration wasn't approving public service loan forgiveness. The Biden administration has taken those programs and has forgiven the loans of more than 1 million public servants in thanks for the public service they provide, whether it's in the military, whether it's teaching, whether it's working as a frontline health professional or working for a local or state government. I think that is a powerful strategy to lift costs off everyday people's shoulders and to provide an incentive for people to go into public service professions. That has been the heart of the Biden-Harris administration's loan forgiveness program, and I strongly support it. Because if you go to school and then you commit your life to public service, I think that is a very worthy cause, and I think loan forgiveness under those circumstances makes perfect sense. It's also good for the economy, because when you lift the burden off people's shoulders to pay back loans, they're able to buy a house or buy a car or spend more money in their communities.
Mr. Kaine, thank you. Mr. Cowell, as of last October, the U.S. Department of Education says more than 1 million Virginians owe a collective $43 billion in federal student debt, impacting their ability to contribute to our economy. So, Mr. Cowell, how would you help these Virginians ease that burden? You have 60 seconds.
Again, bring down the interest rates to zero. And also, we need to withhold federal funding for any colleges that keep pumping up the tuition costs. Why does college cost so much? When he went to University of Missouri, it was $500 a year. Now it's 36 times more expensive. And so why is that? How come these large colleges have such large endowments and they're not co-signing for these loans? That's the people we need to go after. And look, we have the GI Bill. That is a great program for you. If you're struggling to pay for your school, then get a GI Bill. That means go out and serve the military. You'll get stipend as well as tuition. We need to fix education, and we need to do it now. But here's the thing with people like Senator Kaine. You've been in office, sir, for 30 years in various offices, in the U.S. Senate for 12. Why have you not fixed it yet?
Virginia was the best. When I was governor, Virginia was named the best state for a child to be raised in the United States, the best managed state, and the best state to do business. And that continues because of our education system.
Mr. Kaine, Mr. Cow. You respond, Mr. Cow.
Oh, again, he says what he's going to do. It's going to be like, hey, why haven't you done it yet? Honestly, of the 227 bills that Senator Kaine has proposed, only 3 of them made it through.
That's completely wrong.
That's a 99% failure rate. My profession is disarming
Check the tape
bombs.
on that. That's completely wrong.
Okay, sir. There's 2 truths in the world. Okay, never walk in a Target store wearing a red shirt, and never go against an Asian when it comes to math. Trust me.
What does that mean, gentlemen? We're going to move on.
Look, he's got a 99% failure rate. If I just used bombs and I had 99% failure rate, I wouldn't be here.
Best managed state in America, best state for
Gentlemen.
business, best state for
Mr.
education.
Kaine, Mr. Cow, we're moving on to the next topic. Deanna.
Thank you, Tom. Mr. Cowell, we're going to start with you. In the last few weeks, the Biden administration announced $1.3 billion for historically black colleges and universities to ensure funding. Mr. Cowell, would you support continued investment for HBCUs from Congress? You have 45 seconds.
Absolutely. And I don't know why they have to come hand in hand every single year. Let's make this a permanent thing and just move forward so that we can, again, like I said, education is the only equalizer out there. Let's allow for people to pull themselves up and start giving back to this country.
Thank you, Mr. Cowell. And Mr. Kaine, given the record high deficit, how can future HBCU students trust that there will be continued investment? You have 45 seconds.
First, go by my track record. I have battled for HBCU funding for Norfolk State and other universities during my entire career. We could go for a walk right after this event, and I could show you buildings on this campus that were built because of bond packages I supported as a lieutenant governor and I could also show you programs on this campus that I have supported as United States Senator. My commitment to HBCUs is intact for my entire 30 years, and I'm running against someone who says he would abolish the Department of Education. That is an extreme position that would hurt HBCUs, but would also hurt all of our colleges and all of our K-12 schools.
Thank you, Mr. Kaine. Mr. Cowell, before those students or children make it to college, they often need childcare, and the high cost of childcare is forcing many families to make difficult decisions about whether to pay to help get care for their children or potentially quit jobs that don't cover those expenses. Would you support providing incentives to businesses to create on-site childcare options? You have 30 seconds.
Absolutely. I mean, my wife and I had to make a decision a long time ago. We have 5 kids. And, we made the hard decision that I would work and she would stay at home to take care of the kids because it costs too much to send them to daycare. And so, yes, I would absolutely incentivize and help companies, get companies to help out with childcare for their families.
Thank you, Mr. Cowell. And to follow up, how would America pay for those incentives? You have 15 seconds.
Again, there's a lot of things we can pay for if we stop paying $1 billion a day to illegal aliens. That's half $1 trillion a year that we keep paying for illegal aliens to house and feed them into this country. Let's take care of Americans first.
Thank you, Mr. Cowell. And Mr. Kaine, you have already indicated your support for giving businesses incentives to create those on-site childcare options. Would Americans face increased taxes to pay for that? You have 30 seconds.
I have a proposal with Senator Katie Britt, a Republican of Alabama, to take 3 provisions currently in the tax code to help parents and employers afford childcare that are not very robust, and so they're not really working. And so Senator Britt and I have a bipartisan proposal that will be discussed when we do tax reform next year that would put money back in parents' pockets. I also successfully supported in the American Rescue Plan, which my opponent opposed, a provision to dramatically expand the child tax credit that reduced poverty and put money back in the pockets of parents that they could use for child care expenses, that they could use for health care. That provision has expired because Republicans won't support its extension. But if I'm a senator in a 3rd term, we're going to restore the child tax credit, which will be the biggest tax cut for working people in the history of this country.
Thank you, Mr. Kaine, for outlining your legislative priorities and what you're working on. But the question was, would Americans face increased taxes to pay for these kinds of incentives or tax cuts?
My belief is there are savings that we can find that will help do this. I'll give you an example. We are now finally negotiating for prescription drug prices with the big pharma companies under Medicare. In the first year alone, that is going to save taxpayers and seniors $7.5 billion. And that's just negotiating on 10 drugs prices. If we negotiate all drugs under Medicare, we will save tremendous amounts of money that we can use for other priorities like childcare. My opponent opposed that bill and says he would repeal it if he is elected. That will cause prescription drug prices to skyrocket.
Thank you, Mr. Kaine. We now will move on to reproductive rights. Tom.
And
Oh,
going to
I'm so
IVF.
sorry. We are going to IVF.
Correct.
Mr. Cal, the average in vitro fertilization treatment costs $50,000 per pregnancy. Do you believe the federal government and private insurance should cover that cost? You have 60 seconds.
The federal government, no, and the private insurance, yes. Look, my family benefited from fertility treatments, so I don't know where all this commercial saying I'm against IVF, I don't know where that comes from. Look, I'm about families, and I want to grow families. And my second of 5 children was adopted, and I want to make sure that we're pro-family. It costs a lot of money, and it was a lot of time and paperwork. The paperwork that's necessary to protect the child, but it was so hard, and I want to allow for families to welcome a child into their lives like we did. Our second child, who is now, a young mother, and now I'm a grandfather of a baby girl because of her coming into our home. So I'm very grateful that I want to be very family friendly in the United States. That includes allowing for fertility treatments like my family got, or adoption like my family did.
Thank you, Mr. Cal. You did mention private insurers. How would you incentivize them to do so, to cover those costs in a way that wouldn't leave Americans absorbing higher premiums?
That's a great question, because again, with his plan, the Medicare X, that's just a Trojan horse for a single-payer, government-run program. It's the entry program for Kamala Harris's favorite thing, which is single-payer and government-run health insurance. When you have no choices, you will have no choices. Medicare for all, one is for all is Medicare for none. And so this is why we need competition within the insurances, and that's how we're going to allow for them to pay for IVF and other fertility treatments.
Thank you, Mr. Cal. Mr. Kaine, the same question to you. At that average cost of $50,000 per pregnancy, do you believe the federal government and private insurance should cover the cost of IVF? 60 seconds.
Let me tell you why Virginians are very skeptical about my opponent's support for IVF. He said he would support a national bill that would establish that life begins at conception, no exceptions. Everyone looking at that bill has said that it would dramatically restrict women's ability to access abortion and even contraception and IVF. He's never taken back his support for that bill. That kind of a national bill would do grave harm to reproductive rights for all Americans. Here's what I believe, that insurance policies often mandate coverage for certain things, mental health treatments and others. And yes, insurance policies, including policies that are offered on the exchanges under the Affordable Care Act, should mandate a coverage for IVF services, subject to the same copays and deductibles that others. I don't think IVF services should be carved out in a way that heart surgery or other really important procedures are not. But yes, a mandated coverage subject to the same rules for other coverages. But we should not pass a national bill that would restrict people's access to abortion, contraception, and IVF, and we also shouldn't demonize women and doctors. My opponent has compared women and doctors who make the difficult choice to terminate a pregnancy to Nazis and bomb makers. That is outrageous insult to women who are making tough personal reproductive decisions that they are entitled to make.
Mr. Kaine, thank you. Mr. Cal, I want to give you an opportunity. And if our audience would quiet down,
Hold on, I want to be very clear tonight. I will not sign any bill at the federal level to ban abortion. I don't know where he gets this from. The Supreme Court made the right decision to push this down to the states. what Senator Kaine wants to do is take it out of the hands of voters in Virginia and give it to a senator in California and a congressman in Idaho. He's got the most extreme views, which is unlimited abortion up to including lone birth. And
That is not
yes,
my
sir,
position.
It is because
That is
you
not
voted
my
against.
position.
Hold on, because you voted against the Born Alive Infant Protection Act. That is the most extreme thing there is. You voted against it for child born alive. You voted against that.
Let me
And so,
explain.
so what he wants to do is take it out of the hands of voters. I want to keep it back in the hands of voters because I don't want a senator from California or a congressman from Idaho making decisions for Virginians.
Let me explain.
Mr. Kaine,
Yeah.
when our audience quiets down, I do want to give you 15 seconds to
Yeah.
respond there.
There was a bill called the Born Alive Protection Act that I did vote against because it was already federal law. It had become federal law 10 years before, and every state prohibits abortions in those circumstances. This was an effort to smear women, like calling them Nazis or bomb makers. I voted against smears, and I have the only bipartisan proposal in Congress right now that would codify Roe versus Wade, which should never have been overturned. Women should be protected to make their own reproductive decisions before the point of fetal viability, and state legislatures should be able to impose reasonable restrictions after. That's Virginia law right now. I support it, and I think it's the right law for the United States.
Thank you, Mr. Kaine. Thank you, Mr. Kaine. But now that you've brought that up, what abortion restrictions would you support?
Those that are in place in Virginia right now, for example,
Can you
the
specify?
requirement of parental consent or notification and consent for minors with a judicial bypass, the narrowing of circumstances after the point of viability in which an abortion can be performed, and a requirement that those circumstances have to be validated by physicians. Those are Virginia laws right now that I do support, but we should restore the basic protections of Roe versus Wade and not celebrate its
Mr. Kaine.
demise as
That is time.
Federal bill, where's
We do have to move on. We are almost out of time here, so we do have to move on. Mr. Cowell, you will get this question first, actually. So, are there any circumstances under which you would not certify the results if Vice President Kamala Harris won the election? You have 60 seconds.
I don't know where you're asking this from. I mean, I would certify because if she won, then she won. That's the thing. It's like, they keep calling me a threat to democracy. Do you understand that I know what a threat to democracy is? My father was put on a kill list by the communists. We had to run away in the middle of the night to get out of Vietnam. I've spent my entire life fighting to defend democracy. And people who've never worn the cloth of this nation call me a threat to democracy. After just 3 years ago, they were thanking me for my service. I know what threat to democracy is. And you know what threat to democracy is? What's happening on our border, our southern border, when 13,000 convicted murderers and 16,000 convicted rapists are coming through. What's happening on our campuses when they shout death to America. That's a threat to our democracy.
Thank you, Mr. Cowell. Mr. Kaine, we have the same question for you. Mr. Kaine, same question to you. Are there any circumstances under which you would not certify the results if former President Donald Trump were elected? You have 60 seconds.
I'm going to certify the result. I did it in 2016 when I was on the ballot, wasn't happy about the result, conceded immediately, and certified it. I didn't try to inspire an attack on the Capitol. I don't think I've ever called my opponent a name like he's suggesting, but I do point out something about my opponent's extreme position. He has taken the position that those who attacked the Capitol on January 6, 2021, leading to death, including of law enforcement officers and others.
Hold on. That's been debunked so many times.
Let me finish. He has said that those individuals should not be prosecuted, they should be compensated. Those who
Thank you,
attack the
Mr. Kaine.
Capitol.
We are just about out of time, so we're going to have to end that.
We're going to go to closing statements, gentlemen. First, we will allow the candidates 30 seconds for closing statements. Mr. Cowell, you will go first, which was determined by recent polling.
When Vietnam fell, we had nowhere to run to. But this great country called the United States took us in and gave us an opportunity and gave us life. I grabbed onto the American dream. I went to the top schools in the country, including the United States Naval Academy. But I spent 25 years defending that right to come here. This country has taken a dark turn, and the Democrats are turning this country into what I ran away from. And 30 years.
Mr. Cowell, I need time for Mr. Kaine's closing statement. We're running out of time. Mr. Kaine, 30 seconds.
The choice is pretty clear for Virginians. You want results or you want extremism. I led my city to a renaissance as mayor that's still continuing. When I was governor, we were best state for business, best educated, best managed state. In the Senate, I've worked on powerful legislation so that we are building again with infrastructure, we're making again with manufacturing, and we're innovating
Mr.
again, and Virginia is leading the way.
We're out of time. Thank you for joining us.